Sam Greer stood at the observation window of the starward vigil and watched the green world turning slowly below. Thyrus 6 was beautiful in the way that dangerous things often were. Thick jungles covering every continent, rivers like silver veins cutting through endless canopy, and somewhere down there, something alive that was the size of a small city. He pressed his forehead against the cold glass and closed his eyes. 2 years since Laura died. 2 years since the hospital room, the quiet machines, the hand that went still inside his own. He had volunteered for this deep space mission because Earth had too many memories and space had none. Out here, grief was just another passenger. It sat beside him in the mess hall, slept in the bunk above his, and stared back at him from every dark window. "You look terrible," Katie Marsh said from behind him. Sam opened his eyes and turned. Katie stood in the corridor with 2 cups of coffee, her red hair pulled back in a messy knot. She was the ship's chief communications officer, and she was also the only person on board who told him the truth without wrapping it in something soft first. "I slept fine," he said. "You didn't sleep at all. I checked the corridor logs." She handed him a cup. "Drink. Captain wants us in the briefing room in 10. The briefing room was small and smelled like recycled air. Captain Nate Harlow stood at the front with his arms crossed, his jaw set in that way it always was when he didn't like what he was about to say. Harlow was a careful man. He trusted numbers, protocols, and chain of command. He did not trust surprises, and the biosignature on Thyrus 6 was the biggest surprise any of them had ever seen. "The readings are confirmed," Harlow said, pulling up a holographic display. A massive shape pulsed on the screen, glowing orange against the green of the jungle. A single living organism, approximately 4 kilometers across. Heat signatures suggest thousands, possibly tens of thousands, of smaller organisms inside and around it. "We're looking at a hive structure. A living one." Danny Voss, the youngest member of the crew, leaned forward in his chair with wide eyes. He was 23, fresh from the academy, and everything still amazed him. "A living building, like coral?" he asked. "Like nothing we've ever documented," Sam said quietly. He had studied the readings all night. That was why he hadn't slept. The cellular structure is closer to muscle tissue than plant matter. It breathes. It has a pulse. Harlow looked at him. "I'm sending a ground team. 4 people. Greer, you're leading. Marsh on comms. Voss, you wanted field experience. Here it is. And Lieutenant Pete Odom on security." Pete Odom was a tall, square-shouldered man who kept his weapon clean and his opinions loud. He nodded once from the back of the room, his face showing nothing. They dropped to the surface 2 hours later. The shuttle punched through thick cloud cover and set down in a clearing 1/2 kilometer from the hive. The moment the doors opened, the jungle hit them. Warm, wet air, heavy with smells that had no human name. The trees were enormous, their bark shimmering with faint bioluminescence, and the ground beneath their boots was soft and alive with crawling things. They walked in silence. Katie monitored signals on her wrist device. Danny kept looking up at the canopy with his mouth open. Pete walked with his rifle raised, scanning every shadow. Sam led them forward. He could feel it before he could see it. A low vibration in the ground, in the air, in his chest. A hum so deep it wasn't really a sound at all. It was more like the world itself was breathing. Then the jungle opened, and the hive was there. It rose from the earth like a cathedral made of flesh and bone. Walls of pale, ridged tissue curved upward, glowing faintly from within. Openings like doorways lined the base, each one tall enough for something much larger than a human to walk through. The hum was louder here, steady and rhythmic, and Sam could feel it vibrating in his teeth. "My God," Danny whispered. They didn't get a chance to say anything else. The Valnari came out of the openings all at once. Dozens of them, then hundreds. They were tall, almost 3 meters, with bodies that were part insect and part something else. Something almost human in the way they moved. Their skin was hard and smooth like dark shell, and their faces had large compound eyes that caught the jungle light and reflected it back in fractured rainbows. They made no sound. They simply surrounded the team in a wide circle and stood perfectly still. Pete raised his rifle. Contact. Multiple hostiles. All sides. Lower your weapon, Sam said. They're surrounding us. Lower it. Now. Pete's hands were shaking, but he didn't lower the rifle. One of the Valnari, a warrior, massive, with blade-like arms, moved faster than anything that size should have been able to move. It pinned Pete to the ground in a single motion, one arm across his chest, the other holding his weapon flat against the earth. Pete screamed. The warrior did not hurt him. It simply held him there, the way a parent might hold a child who had reached for something hot. Sam's heart was pounding, but his mind was clear. He had spent his whole career studying alien life, and he knew one thing above everything else. The first moment decided everything. Every moment after was just a consequence of the first. He unclipped his sidearm and set it on the ground. He raised both hands, palms open, fingers spread. Then he knelt. The circle of Valnari shifted. A ripple passed through them. Not movement exactly, but a change in the pattern of their bodies, like a wave passing through tall grass. They parted, and something came through the gap. The queen was enormous. She stood nearly 4 meters tall, her carapace layered and elegant, covered in patterns of bioluminescence that shifted and flowed like living light. She moved with a grace that made Sam's breath catch. Her eyes, darker than the others, deeper, settled on him, and he felt something he could not explain. It was not fear. It was the feeling of being seen completely, down to the bone, down to the grief he carried, down to every hidden and wounded part of himself. Then she let out a single, deep hum that shook the air between them. The warrior released Pete. The circle opened. They were free to go. Sam stood on shaking legs and led his team back to the shuttle. Nobody spoke. Danny was pale. Pete was furious. Katie walked beside Sam, her face unreadable, her fingers moving quickly across her device. It wasn't until they were back on the vigil, behind sealed doors and pressurized walls, that Katie pulled Sam aside. Her face was white. "I've been analyzing the pheromone data from the encounter," she said. "The chemical signatures the Queen was releasing, Sam, they match Valharni selection patterns." "Selection for what?" Katie looked at him, and he saw something in her eyes he had never seen before. It might have been wonder. It might have been fear. She wasn't just looking at you, Sam. She was choosing you. The message from Earth came 3 days after first contact, and it changed everything. Sam was in the mess hall, picking at food he didn't taste, when Captain Harlow's voice crackled through the ship-wide intercom. "Senior staff to the bridge, immediately." On the bridge, Harlow stood in front of the main display, with a look on his face that Sam had never seen before, something between excitement and dread. The screen behind him showed geological survey data from Thyrus 6's surface, overlaid with bright red markers clustered directly beneath the Valnari hive. "Rillium," Harlow said, "the largest deposit ever detected, enough to power every faster-than-light drive in the fleet for the next 200 years, and it's sitting right under that hive." The bridge went silent. Everyone understood what Rillium meant. It was the rarest mineral in known space, the one thing humanity needed and could never find enough of. Wars had been fought over deposits a fraction of this size. "Earth's diplomatic corps has given us new orders," Harlow continued. "We are to establish formal diplomatic relations with the Valnari. Whatever it takes. Whatever they want, we make it happen. Katie caught Sam's eye from across the bridge. Her expression said what she couldn't say out loud, that this was no longer about science or discovery. This was about what it always came down to: resources. 2 days later, something arrived at the ship. The sensors picked up 3 Valnari drones, approaching in a slow, deliberate flight pattern that was clearly meant to show they were not a threat. They carried something between them, a pod, organic and pulsing faintly, about the size of a human head. They left it attached to the outer airlock and flew away. The science team scanned it for hours before declaring it safe. When they opened it in a containment lab, the pod split along a seam and released a cloud of fine particles that shimmered in the air. Everyone in the room stumbled, then went still. Images flooded their minds. Not pictures exactly, but impressions, feelings, shapes of meaning pressed directly into thought. The message was simple and clear. The Queen would negotiate, but only with the one who knelt. Harlow did not like it. He paced his office and argued with the screen for 2 hours, while Earth's command staff insisted. Sam sat in a chair across from him and waited. This is a first contact scenario, Greer. We should be sending a trained diplomatic team, not a xenobiologist who kneels in the dirt. She asked for me, Sam said. She asked for a human who showed submission. That's not diplomacy, that's a power display. Maybe, or maybe she asked for the one person who didn't point a weapon at her people. Harlow stared at him for a long time. Then, the orders came through from Earth, and the argument was over. Sam was going back down alone. The shuttle dropped him at the same clearing. This time, the Valharni were waiting. A group of 6 warriors stood at the edge of the jungle, in perfect formation, and when Sam stepped out, with his hands visible and empty, they turned and walked toward the hive. He followed. Inside was nothing like he expected. The tunnels were wide and warm, lit by soft bioluminescence that pulsed in slow rhythms along the walls. The air was thick and humid, carrying scents that his brain could not quite name, but his body responded to. A loosening in his chest, a slowing of his heartbeat. The hive was alive around him, and it was not hostile. It was welcoming. They led him deeper. He passed through chambers filled with activity, workers tending to the walls, repairing and growing the structure with secretions from their mouths. He passed nurseries, where rows of pale eggs sat in warm alcoves, each one attended by a caretaker who turned to watch him with those fractured rainbow eyes. He passed soldiers standing motionless in alcoves, their bodies still as stone, their attention absolute. Then the tunnels opened into a vast chamber, and the Queen was there. She sat at the center on a raised platform of living tissue, her bioluminescent patterns flowing in slow, complex sequences. Around her, attendants moved in careful patterns, and the air hummed with that deep vibration Sam had felt on the surface. Only here, it was everywhere, inescapable, like being inside a beating heart. Sam stopped at the edge of the platform and waited. He did not kneel this time. He stood straight and met her eyes, and he let himself feel whatever she was sending, not with his ears or his eyes, but with something deeper than either. It came in waves, images, emotions, fragments of understanding pressed into his mind through subsonic hums and pheromone signals. It was like learning to read a language written in feeling rather than words. He caught pieces at first, then more, then whole thoughts. What he understood broke his heart. The Valnari were dying. A fungal plague, something that had crept into their world from the deep soil, was attacking their eggs. Generation by generation, fewer survived. The nurseries he had passed were half empty. The eggs that remained were weak, their shells thin and spotted with dark patches. The caretakers tended them with desperate care, But the plague was winning. The queen showed him what was coming. Empty nurseries, silent tunnels, a hive that would one day go cold and dark and still. She showed him the future of her people, and it was nothing. Then she showed him what she wanted. Human medicine, the biology of a species that had conquered diseases across 100 worlds. She believed humans could find a cure. She was asking for help, and in return, she offered everything. The Realm, a full alliance, military, scientific, cultural, open borders between their species. She offered the hand of her civilization, extended in desperation and in trust. Sam stood in that chamber with alien grief pressing against his mind, and he thought of Laura. He thought of the hospital. He thought of the doctors who had tried everything, and the disease that had won anyway. He thought of how it felt to watch someone you love disappear by degrees, and to be powerless to stop it. "I'll bring this to my people," he said, not knowing if she could understand his words, but hoping she could feel the meaning behind them. "I will do everything I can." The queen's patterns shifted, something softer, something that felt like gratitude and sorrow woven together. She bowed her great head, just slightly, and the chamber fell into a hush. Sam turned to leave, and that was when he saw her, a small figure, barely a meter tall, standing half-hidden behind the queen's body. A young Valhari, delicate, with a shell that was lighter than the others, almost translucent in places, and eyes that were different from every Valhari he had seen. They were large and dark, and full of something he recognized immediately, because he saw it every time he looked in a mirror. Loneliness. The young one watched him with those eyes, and Sam felt a pull in his chest that had nothing to do with pheromones or subsonic hums. It was older than that, simpler. It was one lonely creature recognizing another. He didn't know her name yet. He didn't know that she was the queen's only surviving offspring, the last heir of a dying line. He didn't know that she had watched her siblings fail inside their eggs, one by one, until she was the only one left. He didn't know any of that yet. But he knew that look. He knew it like he knew his own hands. The warriors led him back to the surface, and the shuttle carried him up through the clouds to the Vigil. On the bridge, he delivered the queen's offer to Harlow, and he watched the captain's eyes light up at the word Rylium. He answered questions from Earth's control staff for 3 hours. He filed his report. He ate. He showered. And then he lay in his bunk in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and all he could think about was the look in that small creature's eyes, and the look in the queen's eyes, which he now understood had nothing to do with power or negotiation or strategy. It was the look of a mother watching her world die, one child at a time, and begging a stranger for help. Sam pressed his hand over his face and breathed, and something inside him that had been frozen for 2 years began, very slowly, to crack. The science vessel Dawnline arrived in orbit above Thyrus 6 3 weeks after Sam delivered the Queen's offer. It carried a full medical research team, 12 tons of laboratory equipment, and a woman named Dr. Amy Novak, who walked off the shuttle like she already owned the planet. Novak was brilliant. Everyone said so, including Novak herself. She had cured a respiratory plague on the colony world of Resher 3, developed the first cross-species vaccine for humans and the Pelani, and published more papers than anyone in the field of xenobiology. She was also the most difficult person Sam had ever met. "I've read your reports, Lieutenant Commander," she said to him in the docking bay, not looking up from her beta pad. "They're emotional. I don't work with emotional data. I'll need access to the hive within 48 hours. "The Valnari don't operate on our schedule," Sam said. "Then help them understand ours." Sam looked at Katie, who stood behind Novak with her eyebrows raised almost to her hairline. He took a slow breath and reminded himself that the Queen's people were dying, and this woman might be the one to save them. Getting the Valnari to accept a human research team inside their hive took 4 days of careful negotiation. Sam went down to the surface each day, sat with the queen, and explained what the humans needed: access to the nurseries, samples from the infected eggs, permission to set up equipment inside the living walls of the hive itself. The queen considered each request carefully, consulting with her advisors through long sequences of hums that Sam was beginning to understand in fragments. She agreed. But she set conditions. No weapons inside the hive. No samples taken without a Valnari witness present. And Sam was to remain on the surface as the bridge between her people and his. The joint laboratory was built in a wide chamber near the nurseries. Human equipment sat on platforms of living tissue that the workers grew overnight, shaped perfectly to hold each piece of machinery as if the hive itself had studied the blueprints. Novak was impressed despite herself. Adaptive biological architecture, she muttered, running her hand along a wall. They grow solutions. We build them. Different philosophy, same result. Sam spent his days moving between the lab and the Queen's chamber, translating needs and concerns in both directions. It was exhausting work. The Valharni language of hums and pheromones was getting easier for him, but it was still like trying to read a book written in music and smell. Beautiful, but demanding. It was during the second week that Lien started following him. He noticed her first as a shadow at the edge of his vision, a small shape ducking behind a wall curve whenever he turned. Then she got braver and started standing in the open, watching him with those large, dark eyes from 20 meters away. Then 10. Then 5. Sam did not approach her. He did not reach out or try to coax her closer. He understood, in a way that had nothing to do with xenobiology and everything to do with grief, that some broken things came to you only when you stopped trying to catch them. He simply sat. When he had a free moment between tasks, he would find a quiet spot in the tunnel near the nurseries and sit on the warm floor with his back against the wall. He would close his eyes and breathe, and he would let the hum of the hive wash over him, and he would wait. On the third day of sitting, Lien sat down beside him. She didn't touch him. She didn't make a sound. She just sat there, close enough that he could feel the faint warmth of her body, and they existed together in silence. Katie found them like that and stopped in the tunnel, watching. Later, she pulled Sam aside. You know what she is, right? She's the heir, the only one. Every Valnari in this hive would die for her without a second thought. I know. And she's sitting in a tunnel with you, like you're her favorite person. She's alone, Katie. All her siblings are dead. She's the last one, and she's surrounded by people who treat her like something precious and fragile, and none of them can just sit with her and be ordinary. I know what that feels like. Katie looked at him for a long moment, and something soft and sad moved across her face. She squeezed his arm and walked away without another word. The days turned into weeks. Sam and Lien built something between them that had no name in either language. She would appear wherever he was, in the lab, in the tunnels, in the Queen's chamber, and settle beside him like a small, quiet anchor. She began touching his arm, his hand, his shoulder, with the careful curiosity of someone learning a new texture. He learned that her shell was not cold like it looked. It was warm, almost hot, and it vibrated faintly with the rhythm of her heartbeat. He talked to her sometimes, even though she couldn't understand the words. He told her about Earth, about oceans and mountains and rain, about Laura, and how she used to sing while she cooked, always off-key, always smiling. Lien would tilt her head and listen, and even though she couldn't know what he was saying, she seemed to understand the feeling behind it. Maybe she did. Maybe that was how the Valnari had always communicated, not through meaning, but through the truth beneath meaning. In the lab, Novak was making progress. The fungal plague was complex, but its structure was not unlike certain organisms found on Earth. She worked 18-hour days, drove her team to exhaustion, and argued with Sam about everything from sample protocols to the ethics of genetic intervention. But she was getting closer. Corporal Greg Tannen, one of the Marines assigned to the security detail, watched it all with growing discomfort. He was a good soldier, disciplined, professional, but the Valnari made his skin crawl. He couldn't help it. Their size, their alien faces, the way they moved in silence. He ate alone, slept with his sidearm under his pillow, and counted the days until reassignment. Then came the morning when Novak burst out of the lab, with her hair wild and her eyes bright and her hands shaking. She grabbed Sam by the arm and pulled him inside, talking so fast he could barely follow. A modified antifungal compound, derived from human immune proteins, compatible with Valnari biology. She had tested it on 3 infected eggs overnight, and all 3 had survived. Not just survived, thrived. The dark patches were receding. The shells were hardening. They told the Queen together, Sam translating Novak's rapid scientific language into slow, careful hums and gestures. The Queen listened. She went very still. Then she moved to the nursery herself and stood over the 3 treated eggs, her bioluminescent patterns flowing in sequences Sam had never seen before. The warriors crowded the tunnels. When the Queen finally turned back to face them, she released a single hum that resonated through the entire hive. Sam felt it in his bones, in his chest, in the spaces behind his eyes. It was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. Katie, monitoring from the surface base, would later identify the pheromone signature as the Valnari expression for hope. The hive erupted. Bioluminescent displays cascaded through every tunnel, waves of light rolling along the walls and ceiling like living fireworks. Workers and soldiers moved in patterns that might have been dance or prayer, or something for which humans had no word. The sound was overwhelming, layers of harmony that built and built until the whole hive seemed to sing. Sam stood in the middle of it, surrounded by light and sound, and the overwhelming joy of a people who had been told they would not die after all. And he wept. He just let it come. And Lien was there. She pressed close to his side, her small clawed hand resting on his arm, her face turned up toward him. Around them, Valhari soldiers watched this contact, an outsider touching the royal air, and not one of them moved to stop it. This had never happened before. This was something new. Sam put his hand over hers and held it gently, and the hive sang around them, and for the first time in 2 years, the grief in his chest made room for something else. That night, back on the vigil, Harlow received a coded transmission on a classified channel. He read it alone in his quarters, with the door locked. His face went gray. He deleted the message and sat in the dark for a long time. Earth's military council did not just want the beryllium. They wanted biological samples from the Valnari, tissue, genetic material, reproductive data. They wanted it from the royal bloodline specifically, and they wanted it obtained quietly, without the knowledge of the Valnari or the civilian science team. Sam was not informed. He was in the hive, sitting in a tunnel with an alien child sleeping against his side, dreaming of a future where things might actually be all right. He didn't know what was coming. It happened on a Tuesday. Sam would remember that for the rest of his life. Not the date, not the hour, but the fact that it was a Tuesday, an ordinary day, and the world broke open on it without any warning at all. He was in the joint lab with Novak, reviewing data on the latest batch of treated eggs when the hive changed. It was subtle at first, a shift in the background hum, a tightening in the air. the bioluminescent walls flickering from their usual warm gold to a deep, pulsing red. Then, the Valnari workers in the lab stopped what they were doing. Every single one of them went still at the same instant, like puppets whose strings had been pulled. "Something's wrong," Sam said. He was right. Everything was wrong. In the royal nursery, 3 levels below, Corporal Greg Tannen had just been caught with his hands inside a sealed egg chamber. He had a collection kit in his belt, and 3 vials of genetic material in his pocket. He hadn't even made it to the tunnel exit before the warriors found him. Sam didn't know any of this yet. What he knew was that the tunnels around the lab were suddenly full of soldiers, more than he had ever seen in one place, their bodies rigid, their blade arms extended, their eyes burning with reflected red light. The 2 human technicians working beside Novak backed against the wall, their faces white. Novak grabbed Sam's arm. "What is happening?" "Stay calm," Sam said, though his own heart was hammering. "Stay still. Don't move suddenly." The warriors sealed every exit. The warm, welcoming hive that Sam had come to know over the past weeks became something else. A fortress, a trap, a living thing that had decided to close its fists. The walls pulsed red. The hum deepened into something that vibrated in Sam's stomach and made his teeth ache. Then they came for him. 4 warriors surrounded Sam and separated him from the others. He let them lead him through tunnels that were suddenly narrow and dark, past chambers sealed with thick membranes he had never seen before, down into the deep heart of the hive, where the air was hot and heavy and the light was dim. They brought him to the Queen's chamber. She was standing. In all the time Sam had spent with her, she had always been seated or reclining on her platform, her great body at rest. Now she stood at her full height, nearly 4 meters, and the patterns on her carapace were not flowing. They were blazing, sharp pulses of white light that cracked across her shell like lightning. Her eyes found Sam, and what hit him was not a hum or a pheromone signal. It was rage, pure and vast and old and deep, and beneath it, like a wound that would not close, betrayal. She projected it directly into him, images, feelings, the full weight of what had happened. He saw Tannen in the nursery. He saw the vials. He saw the warriors seizing the corporal. And he saw the eggs, the precious, fragile, newly healed eggs, and the human hands that had reached for them like they were samples to be catalogued and shipped away. Sam dropped to his knees, not because he chose to kneel, because the grief and fury pouring into him were too heavy to stand under. He felt what she felt, the trust she had given, the doors she had opened, the vulnerability she had offered to creatures she did not have to trust, and the small, ugly thing that had been done in return. "I didn't know," he said. His voice was shaking. His whole body was shaking. "I swear to you, I didn't know." She stared at him. The lightning patterns on her shell slowed, but did not stop. She was reading him, not his words, which she could not fully understand, but the chemical truth of his body, the pheromones his skin was releasing, the rhythm of his heart, the particular quality of his fear, which was not fear for himself, but fear that something precious had been broken beyond repair. Above them, on the vigil, Katie Marsh was tearing the ship apart. She had been monitoring the surface feeds when the hive's signal patterns changed. She ran every scan she could think of, and when the results came back wrong, when she found the classified channel, the encrypted orders, the trail that led straight back to Earth's military council and through Captain Harlow's personal terminal, she didn't pause. She walked onto the bridge, where Harlow was preparing an extraction team, and she said his name in a voice that made every officer in the room turn around. "You ordered Tannen to steal genetic material from the royal nursery." The bridge went dead silent. Harlow's face went very still. That information is classified, Lieutenant. You sent a Marine into a nursery full of eggs that we just saved from extinction. You sent him to steal from the people who trusted us, who trusted Sam. I followed orders from command. Following orders doesn't make you innocent, Captain. Katie's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It just makes you obedient. Then he looked at the faces around the bridge, his crew, his people, and he saw what was in their eyes. And he sat down slowly in his chair and said nothing more. Deep in the hive, the Queen made her decision. Sam was taken from the Queen's chamber and led into the great court, a massive circular space he had never seen before. It was carved from the living heart of the hive, its walls lined with balconies and alcoves, and it was full. Hundreds of Volnari stood in perfect concentric rings, warriors, workers, caretakers, elders, advisors. Their eyes reflected the red light of the walls, and every single one of them was looking at Sam. The Queen entered from above, descending on a platform of living tissue that lowered her into the center of the court. She stood beside Sam, towering over him, and she began to speak. Her hum was long and complex, a sequence that rose and fell and wove through harmonics that Sam could feel, but only partially understand. She was speaking to her people. She was telling them what had happened. She was asking them a question. Sam caught fragments. Trust. Broken. This one. Different. Believe. She was asking the court whether this one human could still be trusted. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Sam had ever heard. It pressed against him from every direction. Hundreds of alien beings, each one of them carrying the memory of what humans had just done to their most sacred space, staring at him with eyes that gave nothing away. The air was thick with pheromones he couldn't read, and the hum of the hive had dropped to something barely audible, like a held breath. Sam stood in that silence and understood that everything, the alliance, the cure, the future of two species, hung on what happened next. And there was nothing he could do, no argument he could make, no gesture, no word, no act of diplomacy that would mean anything here. The decision belonged to the Volnari, and he could only stand and wait and be whatever he was. Then he heard it, a soft sound, small feet on the living floor. Lian emerged from behind the Queen. She was tiny against the backdrop of that enormous court, her translucent shell catching the dim light, her dark eyes fixed on Sam. She walked forward, past warriors 3 times her size, past elders who had lived longer than human civilizations, past every powerful and ancient being in her world. She walked straight to Sam, and she wrapped her arms around him. Her grip was fierce and strong and certain. She pressed her face against his chest, the Volnari gesture of absolute trust, the act of placing your most vulnerable point against another being and believing they will not harm you. Her body was warm against his, and he could feel her heartbeat through her shell, fast and steady and brave. No one in the court spoke. Not the warriors with their blade arms, not the elders with their centuries of memory, not the advisors or the caretakers or the workers, not the Queen. The silence held, and it was not empty. It was full. It was the sound of judgment being rendered, without a single word, by a child who had lost everything, and still chose to trust. Sam looked down at Lian, and his vision blurred, and he put his arms around her and held her the way he had once held everything he loved, carefully, completely, with the knowledge that precious things are also fragile things, and the choice to hold them anyway. The Queen bowed her head. Sam had never seen her make this gesture. Then, one by one, starting with the elders and spreading outward like ripples on water, every Valhari in the court bowed their head. Sam stood in the center of a dying people who had chosen to trust him because a child believed in him, and he made a promise that he did not speak out loud because it did not need to be spoken. He would not let them down. Not ever. Not for any reason. When the court finally stirred, the queen raised her head and released a single, clear hum. It was not the sound of hope she had made when the cure was found. It was something older and deeper. Katie, analyzing the data later, would find no match for it in any Valhari record. She would call it, for lack of a better word, faith. The Queen's message to the Vigil arrived 1 hour later. The alliance held, but it would pass through Sam Greer alone. Captain Harlow's authority was no longer recognized by the Valnari people. On the bridge, Harlow read the message and set it down on his console very gently. Like a man putting down something he knew he would never pick up again. 3 months changed everything and nothing. The jungle on Thyrus 6 still hummed with the same ancient life. The hive still pulsed with warmth and light. The twin moons still rose each evening in their slow, patient arc across a sky full of unfamiliar stars. But the world that existed between humans and Valnari was entirely new, and Sam Greer stood at the center of it, sometimes amazed and often exhausted, and always exactly where he needed to be. The political fallout had been enormous. Earth's military council had tried, at first, to bury what happened. Classified channels, sealed reports, quiet reassignments. They pulled Tannen off-world within hours, and transferred him to a station so far from anything that mattered, he might as well have been sent to another century. They issued new orders through Harlow. Restructure the diplomatic team, install trained negotiators, rotate Sam back to a research posting. Not with anger, not with threats, but with something much harder to fight, complete and total indignity to anyone who was not Sam. Diplomatic envoys arrived from Earth, in crisp uniforms, with polished smiles and carefully prepared speeches. The Valhari warriors met them at the jungle edge, stood in silence for exactly 10 minutes, and then turned and walked back into the hive. No hum, no signal, no acknowledgement. The envoys were not attacked or insulted. They were simply treated as if they did not exist. After the third failed attempt, Earth's council gave in. They had no choice. The Relium was too important, the Alliance too valuable, and the Valhari were as immovable as the jungle that surrounded them. They created a position that had never existed before, permanent human ambassador to the Valnari civilization. And they gave it to Sam with a formal ceremony that he attended via video link from the surface, because he didn't want to leave the hive. Harlow was reassigned 3 weeks after the incident. He packed his quarters on the Vigil in silence, and when he walked to the shuttle bay for the last time, the corridor was empty. No one came to see him off. He had not broken any law. He had followed orders from superiors who would never be held accountable. He had done what the system asked him to do, and the system had thrown him away for doing it. And there was a lesson in that, which Sam hoped someone, somewhere, was paying attention to. She told Sam it was for professional reasons. The communication work with the Valnari was the most important linguistic project in human history, and she wasn't going to let some junior officer take it over. But Sam knew the real reason. She stayed because he was her friend, and because she had stood on that bridge and spoken truth to power, and that had made her part of this story in a way that couldn't be undone. She was good at the work too. Within weeks, she had developed the first working translation matrix for Valnari subsonic communication, a device that could convert their hums into rough human language and Sam's spoken words into something close to their frequencies. It wasn't perfect. It would never be perfect. But it was a bridge, and bridges didn't need to be perfect. They just needed to hold. Dr. Novak stayed. This surprised everyone, including Novak herself. The plague treatment was working. Egg survival rates had climbed steadily, and the nurseries were filling again. But there was still so much to learn, so much to do. The Valnari biological systems were more complex than anything human science had ever encountered. And Novak, for all their sharp edges and difficult manner, was the kind of scientist who could not walk away from a mystery. She and Sam had reached something like understanding. Not friendship exactly, they were too different for that, but a mutual respect built on shared purpose. She stopped calling his reports emotional. He stopped wishing she would be warmer. They met in the middle, which was, Sam reflected, what most good things required. The treaty took 6 weeks to draft. Sam worked with the Queen through long sessions in her chamber, translating not just words, but ideas, concepts of law and sovereignty and mutual obligation that had to be rebuilt from the ground up, because the Valvanari had no frame of reference for human politics, and humans had no frame of reference for a civilization that made decisions through collective resonance rather than individual authority. The final document included everything the Queen had originally offered: Rillium trade, shared medical research, mutual defense, open scientific exchange. But Sam had added something that Earth's Council fought against for days before finally accepting: a non-exploitation clause. It stated, in language as clear and simple as Sam could make it, that no human entity would harvest, study, or collect Valvanari biological material without full, informed, freely given consent. The clause had teeth. Violations would void the entire treaty, and Sam had insisted on it, because he had stood in that court and felt the weight of broken trust, and he would not allow it to happen again. The Queen approved the treaty by pressing her great hand against the document, a sheet of synthetic material that recorded her biometric signature, and releasing a hum that the translation matrix rendered as, "This is agreed, this is held, this is truth between us." Sam signed beneath her mark, with a pen that felt very small and very human in his hand. Lian grew quickly. Valhari maturation was faster than human development, and in 3 months she had nearly doubled in size. Her shell had hardened and deepened in color, taking on the dark, rich tones of her mother's carapace, though she kept the translucent patches along her arms that made her look, in certain light, like she was made of stained glass. She had also begun to speak. It started with single words, fragments of human language that she picked up from the researchers and repeated with a voice, like wind passing through hollow reeds. Her pronunciation was strange and beautiful, each syllable carrying harmonics that human vocal cords could never produce. Katie worked with her daily, patient and encouraging, and Lian attacked the new language with a determination that reminded Sam of himself as a young student, hungry for understanding, impatient with limitation. Her first complete sentence came on an evening when Sam was sitting in the Queen's chamber, reviewing the treaty amendments on his datapad. Lian had been resting nearby, her body curled against a warm alcove, apparently asleep. Sam muttered something to himself about supply schedules, and Lian opened her eyes and said, in a voice that resonated through the chamber like a struck bell, "Sam is Hive." He looked at her. She looked back with those dark, deep eyes. The Queen, reclining on her platform, went very still. The attendants paused. The chamber held its breath. "Sam is Hive," Lian said again, and this time she stood and walked to him and put her hand on his shoulder. And Sam understood that she was not simply practicing vocabulary. She was making a declaration. In the Valvanari language, Hive was not just a place, it was a belonging. It was the deepest word they had for family. The Queen's patterns shifted into something soft and flowing, and she released a hum that the translation matrix could not fully render, but that Sam felt in his chest like a second heartbeat. Then she rose, and the court assembled, and in a ceremony that lasted until the twin moons were high in the sky, she did 2 things. First, she named Lian as her formal heir before the full court, a ceremony that had not been performed in living memory, because there had always been many offspring, and the succession had never been in doubt. But Lian was the only one, the last and the first of a new generation, and the court hummed its approval in harmonies that made the walls glow gold. Second, she named Sam as Lian's voice guardian. The translation matrix struggled with the term. Katie spent hours analyzing the pheromone signatures and subsonic patterns before she could explain it to Sam in a way that made sense. "It's sacred," she told him, sitting across from him in the surface base camp, her eyes serious. "It means protector, advisor, and witness. You speak for her when she cannot speak for herself. You guard her truth. In Valnari culture, this bond does not break, not for distance, not for time, not for anything." Sam sat with that for a long while. He thought about Laura. He thought about the life he had planned, and the life he had lost, and the life that had somehow found him in the last place he ever expected. He thought about a small figure sitting beside him in a tunnel, choosing his company when the whole hive adored her, and he thought about arms wrapped around him in a silent court. And he thought about two words, spoken in a voice like wind and bells. He accepted. Of course he accepted. The evening after the ceremony, Sam walked out of the hive and climbed the ridge that overlooked the jungle basin. The air was cooling, and the bioluminescent trees below were beginning their nightly display, soft blues and greens, drifting through the canopy like earthbound stars. The twin moons of Thyrus 6 rose above the horizon, one silver and one pale gold, and the sky between them was thick with constellations he was only beginning to learn. He sat on the warm rock and breathed. Small footsteps behind him. Lian climbed the ridge and settled beside him, tucking her legs beneath her in a posture she had copied from watching him. She looked up at the sky, then at him, then back at the sky. "Stars," she said carefully, pointing upward. "Stars," he agreed. "Sam came from stars." "I did, a long time ago." She considered this. Then she leaned against his side, warm and solid, and he put his arm around her shoulders without thinking about it, the way you do with someone who belongs beside you. From the base camp below, Katie's voice drifted up through the evening air, calling something about dinner being ready. One of the Valharni workers hummed a greeting toward the ridge. The jungle pulsed with its ancient, patient life, unconcerned with treaties and politics, and the small, enormous things that happened between beings who chose each other. Sam looked up at the sky, at the stars where he came from, the vast and cold and beautiful emptiness that had carried him here. For 2 years, he had looked at stars and seen distance. He had seen all the space between himself and everything he had lost. He had seen the universe as a place that took things away. He didn't see that anymore. Lian said something in Valnari, a soft hum he didn't need the translation matrix to understand. It meant something like here, and something like good, and something like stay. Sam smiled. The moons rose higher. The jungles sang. He was already where he needed to be.